Hey guys, welcome back to another episode of the Mind Muscle Connection podcast. Today I have a very special guest on, Rob Wilson. He is a human performance specialist with over 20 years of manual therapy, coaching, and education experience. His work spans a variety of avenues in the field of health and human performance, and he's also the author of the book Check Engine Light there. So Rob, thanks for coming on, man. Really looking forward to chatting with you, and thanks for taking some time out of your day to chat.
Absolutely. My pleasure. Thanks for having me.
I'm curious, human performance specialist, what does that kind of entail? Just curious to hear a little bit more about
It's
that.
a nebulous job title that is used to conflate. No, it's really because I offer a 10,000-foot view from a wide variety of perspectives. So my background is actually in manual therapy. So I did like pain relief based. I was a massage therapist. I did neuromuscular therapy, myofascial, worked in some return to play and return to duty for the military. I have a strength and conditioning background. I owned a gym for a long time. I got into the stress management side of things because clients, athletes, people that I was working with, I found that they weren't properly managing stress, and that deviated any of the awesome plans that we had. At this point in my career, I work with organizations and individuals. So it's like, how do I say all of that shit in one thing, which is like human performance consultant? It's just an easy way, like people who want to do the thing they care about better, then I try to help with that within the context of whatever expertise I have.
Nice. Yeah, no, it's hard to label all of that, all the things you do. And again, it sounds like it's really just based on really what the person needs and where their kind of biggest limiting factor is. And it sounds like with obviously health and performance there, what would be some kind of performance examples that you'll typically work with clients and stuff like that?
My primary clientele right now is naval special warfare. So I work with a lot of operators, and I've been working as part of a program called the Continued Mission Program that's developed by my friend Alex Oliver, who is a former Navy SEAL, and he has a sort of outside the wire human performance program here in Virginia Beach. And so that program is sponsored by the Navy SEAL Foundation. So the book that you mentioned, Check Engine Light, that's a health curriculum that I've been teaching to this group of SEALs and SWIC guys who go through this program for the last 3 years. So somewhere around 700 operators have gone through the program. And then I've worked inside the wire as well with different commands in both the US and allied forces. So that's really been my primary clientele. But I do executive performance, right? So some C-suite people will hire me to help them recover from a surgery, or just because they have the money to feel better. So they'll hire me to oversee all their recovery metrics. I work a lot with elite grapplers. So I work with Standard Jiu-Jitsu, which is for sure one of the best grappling teams in the country. And the head coach, Greg Souders, is a good friend of mine. And I've been working with athletes on his roster, DeAndre Corby, Gavin Corby, those guys for many years now. So that's really as far as sports go. I work with them a lot. And then I work with Altus, of course, which is a very highly regarded track and field training organization, as well as coach education. So I do some professional coaching of coaches. So that's the gamut of the performance clientele that I have.
And so you mentioned like stress management earlier. That's always a concept that interests me, but I do feel like it's like a buzzword. So I guess like with that, like what specifically do you like, is that something that you still find is a big issue with a lot of people you work with? And what does that kind of entail when you work around stuff like that?
Yeah, and I agree with you. It is a buzzword. And the reason I use it is because people have some understanding of what that means. But I've really come to think of it more as like load management.
Yep.
So, what are the different factors that are influencing your potential to adapt to purposeful stressors, like, for example, training? And so, over time, stress management became load management. But really, it's about understanding as many of the relationships of the component factors in a person's life. And I think a lot of times, for whether it's if you're a fitness professional or you work in a collegiate or professional sports strength and conditioning environment, we tend to get siloed into thinking about like the effects of a program on an individual, or the effects of a recovery modality on the training effect that we just did, without considering the totality of the context around this person. And it's really important for a lot of places in the collegiate or in the elite performance environment. You can get away with considering context a little bit less because there's so many controlled variables. But once you start dealing with something like C-suite executives and how much their day changes, and some of these people are working like 80 or 100 hours a week, and they often have families that they're really involved with, and their kids do travel sports, and they're trying to grow another business while they run their current business. This is like super overachieving people. And then they listen to a podcast and go, oh, I want to do 5x5 squats because I want to be big and strong. I'm like, that is a program written for professional weightlifters, which you are not. So you'll get good results for the first 9 months, and then your nervous system will crash because you work 100 hours a week. So it's helping them. When I think of stress management, it's like, what are all the contextual factors that contribute to or detract from the outcome that we've identified? And sometimes that can mean adding a modality like breath work, but often it just means knowing dosages of the different variables and trying to control the ones we can control as effectively as possible. So knowing what the leverage points are. And again, adding recovery can be helpful, but sometimes it ends up becoming another stressor because it's like a thing you've got to get to.
Yeah, I like that load management. I think that's a good way to state it. And I'm sure again, it's like similar to like allostatic load and stuff like that. I know that's something
Exactly.
that gets brought up a lot. And I like that. I think that's a great concept. And especially with the example you gave there of the person that's like doing a million different things. And then again, they're probably going to be the type of person that like is going to try to just continue to do a million different things. And like you said,
100%.
it ends up breaking down. I think it's interesting though, because this is something that I've come across. And I feel like when people hear load management or like stress management and stuff like that, they literally think it's just psychological stress, right? That's the only kind of thing that they think it is. But it's, as you're alluding to, there's a lot of different things that go into that. What would be some kind of top ones that you'll typically see that go into the load management that maybe people don't typically think about?
I think probably the one that's most overlooked is how much time a person has. Like what, especially if we keep this to the conversation of whether it's like executive people or whatever, is there's a lot of volatility in scheduling. And I work with military and first responder communities a lot. And so there's a lot of volatility in how their days are going to run. They're not really sure what to expect. And that with people who are in C-suite positions a lot as well, they get up in the morning and they think their day is going to look like one thing. And by the end of the first hour of their workday, it's something completely different. And so that kind of uncertainty in how your time is going to be managed puts an additional stress load on the person that isn't such high magnitude that it's easy to feel, but it aggregates as days, weeks, and months go on. And if you're the consultant, the fitness trainer, and you're not accounting for that, often what happens is you get like almost like an inverse hockey stick of benefit. You get an initial spike in fitness, and then over time, this person aggregates illness, injury, burnout, or they have to compensate really heavily for that workload. So I'm doing great and I never feel tired, but I drink 7 cups of coffee a day. I smoke. If I don't smoke, I have a nicotine pouch in my mouth all the time. I drink alcohol in order to go to sleep. It's like I'm actually not rested and healed. And it's like once a year, this person like tears a thing or tweaks a thing. And we're just like, and all of those can at least be mitigated through proper load management. And so when we think about managing, stress can only be managed. It can never be solved, right? Because it's a constant, stress is like gravity, right? It's just always there and there's nothing you can do about it. And we need it. It's important. Like you can't grow and improve without stress. You need stress in order for the adaptive process to occur. But if we have a high intensity stress, frequency of stress, uncertainty of stress, and lack of opportunity for the system to hit some kind of reset over time, that aggregates into what we call allostatic overload, where it doesn't mean that the system, that the person can't perform well, because high performing people generally will find a way. They'll do it in spite of. What it means is that often there's debt that's accruing in the background, whether it's a psychological load, right? Emotional load, or a physical load. And we're never really sure which one or what in what combination those things are going to show up. But sometimes they show up as addictive processes or compulsive behavior. Sometimes they show up as relationship issues. Sometimes they show up as injury or constant or soreness, or they show up as an easier time getting ill, like contracting illness. Or sometimes if you have somebody who's really genetically robust, you have a long delay and then sudden severity, and we get surprised. And so stress management is about understanding that those factors are interplaying with each other all the time. And for me, one thing that's been helpful is to help these individuals clearly identify what their goal really is, right? So sometimes, because if somebody's a very motivated individual, whether it's an athlete, executive, whatever it is, somebody who's like pursuing improvement, they will have a very short term sort of thinking about what's going on. And so I try to go, okay, what really is your goal here? What are you trying to accomplish by doing it? When they don't have enough clarity? Did my Wi-Fi just bounce on you?
It bounced just a little bit, but I don't think you missed anything.
Okay. When we don't have sufficient clarity about the long term, then the only thing you have is what's easy to feel and what's easy to see. And we'll give up the long term for that. And so that's where stress management comes in. And it's not really, people tend to think stress management is equated with feeling better more. Oh, I don't feel stressed.
Yep.
And so they chase short-term markers of not feeling stressed. Whether that's through a substance or a meditation or doing some breath, that means I just don't feel uncomfortable. That's not actually good stress management. Now, in the short term, there are conditions under which things like breathing techniques or meditations or things like that can be useful tools. But what I've found is that they're often used as a palliative that just makes people feel better. And then they think that short term feel better feeling is the same thing as managing stress. And it's not.
It sounds again that's those things are going to help and it's good, but it's like more a short term thing when really there's something else that's the root cause of what's really driving that like stress overload and stuff like that. And that's really the thing that you need to work on the most versus just adding in like stress, like breath work or something like that, or meditation or whatever.
Exactly. And I'm saying that as somebody who's a large part of their career has been teaching these things, but I've just seen them used ineffectively really often. And so then what people do is like, well, this doesn't work because I only felt better for a month. I'm like, yeah, but your life was still a mess.
Yeah.
So you didn't address any part of the life stuff. You just did some breathing shit and it tricked your nervous system for a while, but everything behind it was still a washing machine.
Yeah. Yeah, no, that makes a lot of sense. That's a good thought to have, right? It's do those things, but again, you still need to attack the main thing that's really causing like the large stress load on your body. I also read an article that you just wrote a couple months ago about robustness. I think that's a super interesting topic too, and I think you just brought it up. But again, we're not trying to live, like you said, we're not trying to have a stress-free life. We don't want that's not good either. So it's a good skill to have to be able to build some robustness as well too.
For sure. And really that's ultimately like what any fitness, we're talking about a fitness environment. And this is where fitness and performance overlap and diverge, right? But in a fitness environment, when we think about building robustness, robustness means it's hard to disturb something, right? It's hard to push it out of its normal range of existence, right? So if we're talking about physiology, we have a normal like homeostatic range. There's amount of stress that we can take, whether it's the amount of force through a limb or a psychological load. Robustness is I can take a lot before things break, right? And that's important. And I think of that building the size of the bucket, like how much water can the bucket take before the whole thing spills over, right? That's robustness. But then there's also terms like resilience, right? And being resilient is this thing can take a lot of stress and then return to its original state with very little time or energy expended, right? So that's robustness and resilience. And those are two primary goals. And there's also concepts like antifragility, which is if the system is exposed to stress, then it actually can get stronger. It will adapt and change so that the next time it can handle more. And that's how biological systems are pre-designed, I guess I could say, for lack of a better term. But often our targets are robustness and resilience. And if you're training, if you're exercising or you're engaging in, again, a thing like cognitive training, mental exercises, meditation, whatever, then part of the goal is to make the bucket bigger, right? That's what training is for, to make it harder for the system to get disturbed. And so even something as simple as doing resistance training to add muscle mass, is actually a component of robustness, right? We know that adding muscle mass does a lot more for us than make our t-shirts fit different, right? We have hormonal responses and changes our metabolic state, and then even can help us resist unexpected impact, right? So there's some benefit to having a more muscular system, but it's not all there is. And we also want to be able to have a system that's very adaptable and flexible and can change over time. And being too robust and too narrow of a pathway can also make us very brittle and fragile. And so that's what we want to be careful of is, and that's in any training domain, right? This happens with stress management too. People start doing breathing exercises, and if they have any disruption or they feel too stressed, then they don't know how to deal with it. And that's how is that functional? Like I've had some clients, and this isn't to necessarily pick on yoga in particular. I love yoga, but I've had some clients who were like long-term yoga practitioners, 30 years plus, who could sit in unbelievably uncomfortable looking positions with their bodies and be totally calm and relaxed in the face. But if I asked them to do a Tabata interval on a concept two rower, fall apart at the seams, not just physically, but psychologically, driving into that kind of effort, like really putting effort against a high degree of resistance was something they were unaccustomed to. And to me, you should be able to do both. You should be able to sit quietly in peace and not have to be constantly driven into action. But you should also be able to put out a very high degree of effort under lots of resistance, whether that's physical or psychological. And if you don't have access to that full continuum, you're not actually very robust. You're just robust in one small direction, which makes you fragile, right? It's like a knife that's been forged too long. Like it looks really good, but you smack it in one bad place and the whole thing just shatters. Right?
It sounds like there's a few things. It's like obviously you have some people that with the modern environment makes robustness very challenging if you don't like actively seek that out, right? Because we just naturally your body's going to want to be super comfortable, and if you don't stress it like that, we can be not robust. But then also I think it sounds like too there's an issue of being like overly robust in one area, not necessarily in other areas. And then the third one, there was one more that I wanted to bring up there. I know those are the two. Let me think on that last. There was a third one that I wanted to bring up. God, I forgot. But yeah, I know those are two of them, right? Am I on the right track there with that?
Yeah, for sure. For sure. Yeah, you can get so narrowly robust that you're fragile for sure. And the idea over time is to have ways to audit the other areas to be able to identify where you're lacking. My friend Dan Paff talks about it like spinning plates, right? You're always just you like get one plate spinning, you're like, okay, and that's the job of a coach to some degree, right? If you're a coach or you're a trainer, what you're doing is, oh, here's one, we're going to get this son of a gun spinning, and then, oh, this one's slowing down, and you spin this one, you spin this one. And that's the idea, is that you have some system that keeps you looking. For one, you have to know what the different plates are, right? That there are sort of psycho, emotional, social areas, right? There's areas of physical motion, and then there are biochemical areas, and they're all overlapping. But okay, what are the markers I'm looking at? And I'm always just spinning these plates together, and then knowing that what keeps the plate spinning over time changes. What works for me, I'll be 45 soon. What works for me now is not what worked for me when I was 35. I was talking to a buddy of mine about this morning. What my nervous system could tolerate
Yeah.
in totality now is not the same as when I was 35. And when I tried to carry it through with all the cognitive workload I have, I thought my battleship was going to sink. And that's what we mean when we say stress management. If I have a higher cognitive workload from work, it doesn't live in some separate suitcase from the physical training that I do at the gym or my jujitsu training. It's all just one thing, and that's me. And I have to be honest with myself about what's working and what's not. And it can be hard to do because sometimes our identity gets attached to those things. I just want to be the work hard guy. I can't believe I don't squat as much anymore. And it's really hard to let stuff like that go.
It's interesting bringing that up because I'm 34 now and we just had our first child like a year ago. And I also feel I'm trying to provide and I have a lot going on from like a professional standpoint that I'm trying to do. And again, a lot of it is a cognitive load and it's like load. And it's, man, I can already definitely tell a big difference in terms of like when that's higher, it's, I just can't do the type of training in terms of like volume that I used to be able to do even right now. Like I'm obviously trying to do all the things I can to maintain that, but it's like you said, something's got to give there. And I think people don't really understand that like something like you said, cognitive load can also impact that as well too. So I did remember the third thing that I want to bring up here. The
Okay.
other thing would be so like feeling like you need to have things be perfect, right? So again, maybe that comes back to the yoga person, like always in that kind of state, but it's like feeling like everything needs to be perfect. And when some things go wrong, it completely throws you off. Like again, if your meals aren't perfect or sleep's not absolutely perfect, that's another thing that I feel like would be an issue around that concept of robustness.
Yeah, it makes you fragile, right? So one of my mentors, long time mentors, is Dr. Kelly Starrett, right? So he wrote Becoming a Supple Leopard, Ready State podcast, right?
Yeah.
Kelly, everybody knows Kelly is. One of his sayings is don't be precious. And you probably should be looking to have an 8 out of 10 for the longest timeline possible. But any attempt to optimize in one category means that other categories are being ignored. So if you're too focused on keeping one plate spinning perfectly, what happens is all the other ones crash to the floor. And it's actually the combination of all of them together that is what gets you the outcome you want. Now, with that said, I think under short-term conditions, it's okay to hyper focus, right? And so if you have completely neglected your nutritional quality for a decade, then it behooves you to hyper focus for a given period of time until it's manageable. And then once it's in a stable state, then you let the system work on its own until it needs to be reviewed again. It's just if you have a household budget, if you look at scrutinize every penny that you spend every day, you'll go crazy unless you're in debt. And if you're in major debt and you're trying to pay debt off, then you have to scrutinize every penny because you don't have any pennies. So you better know where everyone's going. If you got whatever, if you're in your 30s, you got 100 grand in the bank and you spend whatever 10 more bucks a month or 100 more bucks a month, it's probably not going to affect the stability of your household that much. And so those are the contextual factors that we can keep in mind when we're thinking about, okay, is this the appropriate time to hyper focus? But on that same note, just to zoom out a little bit, I think some of that fragility is from the pendulum swinging culturally, where for a long time everything was just shut up, no one cares, do your work harder than everybody else, pull yourself up by the bootstraps. Nobody wants to hear about your feelings or how things went for you. Just do your job and get it done. And there's a place for that, but it does leave some humanity behind. And so what swings the other way is how I feel matters all the time. No matter how I feel, it's okay for me to disregard my duties or my obligations. And so I'm going to blow around like a plastic bag in the wind all the time and then wonder why I don't get what I want out of life. And so I think what we need to do is have the pendulum swing in the center a little bit, where it's not a complete waif getting washed around like a jellyfish in the ocean, but at the same time acknowledging like that we're human beings and that there's some emotional life and that you can grind yourself into an early deathbed. So there's some balance there. And that's what I think. And some of that is like what personality types are attracted to what. If I go back to the yoga example, one thing I would say to credit the individual who I had in mind is that she was self-aware enough to pursue course correction. So she knew she needed it and that I offered something different that would challenge her in that way. And in spite of the difficulty that it provided her, she kept coming for years and years. So then now that speaks to a different layer of robustness and resilience, even though that wasn't her comfortable place. And how many people who are more of like the gym head, grind it out, get after it, put on Ride the Lightning in your headphones and just grind through dumbbell work. How many of those people seek out the ability to sit still with their own thoughts? And I'm sure there are some who do both, but many people just go, this is the zone I'm comfortable in. These people are wimps. We're tough. So I'm the tough person. Instead of, man, can I sit quietly? Can I sit in peace and hold my child's hand Or can I hold my in-laws hand while their spouse dies? Can I hold space? But it's just being a more complete human, I think. And so I think when we think about things like stress management, that's all included in that whole package.
Yeah, no, it's a good point you bring up. And I like to, it's like it's also context dependent on the person, like you said, right? So it's like what's going to be a tough thing for one person may be easy until, again, that context is super key. And knowing that person there, I think, is super important as well, too. Cool, man. Yeah, no, as I told you, brought you on here to talk about breath work, and I knew we were going to go on some tangent. A really good one, though. I love it. I think that's super, super interesting topic.
It gives
But
us context
yeah,
for breath
absolutely.
work, right?
Yeah, absolutely. And we just talked about the importance of context as well, too. And so, yeah, I wanted to chat with you about breath work and breathing, just because, again, I haven't really had anybody on to chat about it. And I've learned a lot more about it in the last little bit and just how important it is, right? Like it's something that we do 1,000 times a day, and it's just the body tightly regulates what's going on there. But it's going to, again, I think it can get dysfunctional without us really realizing it there. And so I guess my first kind of question to go off of breath work is how common is poor breathing, and maybe what would we describe poor breathing and the difference between good and bad breathing?
Yeah, it's hard to say accurately how common poor breathing is because people don't report that they're breathing poorly until there's a problem.
True.
And so, could you be limited in your capacity to use breathing well to support health and performance? In that case, most everyone I've ever worked with has had limited capacity because they haven't trained it. And so that's an important thing to remember is that our bodies they're incredibly adaptable and resilient. And so if we're just talking about baseline levels of function to get around the world and buy groceries and pick your kids up from school, most people breathe just perfectly sufficiently in the absence of any disease process or like mechanical dysfunction. Like you said, breathing is tightly regulated because if it's not, we die. So it's very tightly regulated. I think the question is, if we train it purposefully, what benefits does it yield? And those, in my opinion, are numerous, and very few people have properly utilized those advantages, generally because it's so easy to take for granted, because it works so well. Even in really high performing athletes I've worked with, they usually don't think about it until it's going really bad. All of a sudden, they're like, man, I have sleep apnea. I should probably breathe better. Or, man, I'm getting panic attacks on the track. I should probably pursue some breathing thing. Or my conditioning has hit a wall. Could breathing help? So it's when there's a problem that arises that it often shows up, at least in fitness and performance. Now, if we go to the other side of the spectrum, like martial arts or yoga or those sort of Eastern movement or spiritual disciplines, they're core components of those practices because breathing reaches so deeply into so many aspects of our physiology that it's a huge lever. So even the simplest breathing practice can yield lots of benefit. But as far as dysfunction, I don't know that it could be said. There's some stats out there, but it's like those are just people who have breathing dysfunction, right? So somebody who's never reported a dysfunction, I put some guys who are in naval special warfare, guys who are SEALs on exercise bikes, and they're very fit. But do they breathe as effectively as possible? They don't. And it's not because something's wrong with their breathing, it's because they haven't trained their breathing. Right.
No, that makes a lot of sense. Like, again, it may be that, like, it's, again, something that you need to train, right? Just like if you want to build more muscle, it's just because you don't resistance train doesn't necessarily mean that you're going to have dysfunction or anything like that. It's just, hey, if we want to get better at it, like we need to actually practice it on there.
Exactly.
Am I on their kind of right concept there with that, or right thought process?
Yeah, of course. There's people who live to be very old and never resistance train. My grandma is 90. She's turned 90. And I just started her on a resistance training program a month ago. She never resistance trained prior to that in her life. She's 90. She takes no medicine. So she has really robust genetics. She never smoked. So she hasn't had bad habits, but she never lifted weights in her whole life. So that's not the question. The question is, if she had lifted weights, would she have even more movement options than she has now? Would she be even more robust? And that's the conversation we have to have, is what benefits are conferred by investing attention and energy into it. And the cool thing about all breath training is it's really versatile and it's integrative, because every other exercise that you're already doing, and even in daily life, you're breathing anyway. So when you do breath training, we're just asking you to breathe in a specific way while you do other stuff that you're already doing. And then you get an additional benefit. So that's why I like it so much. Feel like one of the reasons I feel like it's so important.
Yeah, no, I'm glad you framed it that way. That's a good, I didn't really think of it that way. So I guess in what would, let's maybe talk about that then. Like in terms of breath training, what would be some added benefits that somebody would see? They are that person that, again, they train, they're consistent, but they've never really paid attention to their breath because it's just like you said, like we've said, it's just a natural thing you do. You don't really think you can change it in any way.
Yeah, one thing that we forget that it's for a lot, even before we talk about like directing psychology or physiology in a specific direction, is awareness. The root benefit is that it's a very honest monitoring system for how we're responding to given stress, whether that's in training or in life in general, because it's such a core part of our physiology that responds both to physical stress and psychological slash emotional stress. It will tell us the truth about how we're reacting to that stress, whether it's in a moment and I gasp and hold my breath, or I'm having an uncomfortable conversation with my spouse about my bad habit, and those things are telling us our real reaction to those situations. And it can even yield awareness around things like how our body's utilizing energy. And this is an intuitive part of how we think. Humans know this already. So we know, for example, if I put you on an exercise bike, right? And regardless of heart rate, if I have you work harder and harder over the course of 10 or 15 minutes, breathing will change, right? You'll breathe harder and faster because your body's using more energy and you're exhaling more carbon dioxide, right? That's why it happens. So we all know that the harder and or longer you work, the heavier you'll breathe and the more likely that you'll breathe through your mouth, right? Totally normal, nothing wrong with that. Let's say you go to, after training, you're like, let's get coffee. I'm gonna get a little shot of cappuccino. Helps with glycogen reuptake, right? So I go get a cappuccino, and the barista who's making my coffee is just standing there, and she's going just like I was, but working as hard as possible on the bike. We know intuitively that person is not fit. You don't have to look at any biomarkers. You don't have to put them on a bike. You know that if somebody's just standing around, or if they just go for a short walk and they're huffing and puffing, they're not in good physical condition. So those breathing markers, those are intuitive ways that we develop awareness about our own state and the state of others around us. Now, if you have a systematic approach, then you can become much more finely attuned to those signals and really understand, like day to day over time, how is my body and my mind oscillating and undulating in response to whatever it is that I'm experiencing. And that could just be life in general. Like I do some things where I pay attention to how I'm breathing in the morning, or it could be, man, when I warm up at the gym and I do 5 minutes on a stationary bike, I can normally breathe through my nose pretty well at 75 RPM. But today, man, I'm struggling to breathe through my nose at 67 RPMs. I know I'm not like suddenly out of shape. What's different, right? So it gets us to ask a next layer question about what else, where else, what else is going on in the system? Why am I like this today? And it doesn't mean change your whole plan, but it's just now you have a flag. Oh, I have a flag in the system. So I have some fatigue, something's going on. Maybe I need to warm up a little bit longer than normal. By the time you finish an extra 5 minutes of warm up, you're like, okay, I'm in it. You're like, oh, it's my nervous system's a little bit fatigued from yesterday. But those little fine tuning adjustments, they aggregate over time just from becoming more aware. And again, that could be something you use in your warm up, the way that you time your breathing when you're lifting weights, how your breath recovers between heavy sets of squatting. It's just a new way to tune in to how my level of effort is matching the internal stress physiology of the system. And it tells you the truth every time. No matter what story you have in your head, it always tells you the truth. So that's really the primary benefit. Like I would call that first benefit, is a deeper and broader level of awareness.
So if you're finding that you maybe breathing through your mouth a bit more or whatever, you just naturally go and do that. That could be a sign of there's some stress on the body or just
Could be.
some under recovery
And
potentially.
compared to your history, right? Is this how I normally am?
Yeah.
What else is happening with me? If you have like a crushing leg workout on a Friday, And then you drive 4 hours to go on family vacation, and the elevator's out in your hotel, and you walk up 4 flights of stairs, and you're like, you mean, does it mean don't walk up the stairs and carry your family's luggage? No, don't be a slouch. Do what you need to do. But you might go, oh man, there's still some fatigue. There's fatigue in the system. And then you go, okay, tomorrow morning, when I go to the hotel gym, I'm going to pay a little bit of attention. Is that leg stuff still getting me? I'm still fatigued. Maybe it matters and changes what you do. Maybe it doesn't. Maybe you pull back from a 9 effort to a 7 effort. So
Yep.
you got something in the tank for your family that day. That's all I mean is this gives you some internal monitoring system. It doesn't mean breathing through your mouth and when you do a certain thing is bad or good. We don't have to necessarily put a value assessment on it right away unless we have a specific outcome in mind. But in general, it's just monitoring. What's going on, man? I'm not normally huffing and puffing after a set of 8 dumbbell rows with 80-pound dumbbells. But now I'm like, today, it's like, what happened? Oh man, I was stuck on the subway for 2 hours yesterday, and that dude was coughing all over me. Shit, I need to pay attention to my energy levels today. I might be fighting something off.
Sign that you need to maybe focus on more parasympathetic type work versus just trying to
Exactly.
crush it, just focusing on that a little bit more. Yeah,
Just
no.
gives you a clue.
Yeah.
That's it. Just clues you.
That's awesome. I love that. Again, I like the awareness piece of how your body is, like the stress load your body's under. It could be a good marker for that. What, in terms of other benefits of breath training, is there anything else that we could get from
There's
that?
oh yeah, there's encyclopedias of it. And I think I tend to categorize things very simply. So I try to think, okay, what's the benefit that can be incurred for mind? And I think of mind as the category of my internal state, my relationship with others, right? And my response to stress. That's like the trifecta of mind for me. What's my internal state? How do I relate to others? How am I adapting to stress? And like I said, first of all, there's just the awareness. So, like we used this idea of the bucket earlier. So, first of all, just do I know how much water is in the bucket right now? Then it can be a way to make the bucket bigger. So, I can use specific breath control techniques to expand the bucket, right? I can use it to improve my robustness, right? I can take more because the system is more robust. So an example of that's on the extreme end is things like freediving training, right? So you have static apnea training where you sit still and you do rhythms of breath holding. And over time, what we know is it's a big parasympathetic input, but what it will also do is take you eventually into training thresholds that push your sympathetic, right? It'll expand the amount of sympathetic that you can deal with while you keep your mind calm. The way you react to internal stress physiology can improve. It's almost like getting in the ice bath, independent of the metabolic and the hypertrophy, blah, blah, blah. Getting in something that's extremely cold does fire norepinephrine, right? So we get an adrenal response. And for me at least, one of the big benefits of plunging for people is learning to control themselves, keep your shit together while everything in your body says, jump the fuck out of here. Right. And breath training outside of a plunge situation can do the same thing. So, like longer term breath holding strategies, for example, can teach you to ignore all of the going on in your head and go, no, I'm going to choose to respond differently right now. And that is expanding the bucket, right? And then the other component is breathing can help you empty water out of the bucket. So doing things like transitioning to sleep. So there's things like resonance breathing is an easy example, right? That's one breath every 10 seconds or 6 breaths a minute. There's lots of research behind that breath ratio in terms of balancing parasympathetic outflow, right? So vagal outflow is improved at about 1 breath every 10 seconds. So sometimes doing it before bed or doing it during the day empties a little bit of water out of the bucket, especially when you don't have control over the inflow. So that's the mind category, right? It helps you become more aware, helps you expand the bucket, helps you empty the bucket. And those are 3 really simple ways to think about it. And then there's movement, right? Breathing is really powerful for improving movement. And even if you're just like a gym rat, like I've been most of my life, right? I grew up in a bodybuilding gym. My parents were My mom was a competitive bodybuilder. My dad was a competitive swimmer, martial artist. My stepdad was. And sometimes breathing is just about coordinating pressure, right? So if you're lifting weights, it could just be about utilizing pressure to generate stiffness. And I don't know if you've ever looked at like any of the like golden era bodybuilding stuff, right? Rib
Not too much.
expansion.
Yeah.
That was a really big part of those training systems back in the day. It was like building these really big, robust, resilient rib cages because you could use a lot of pressure and create a lot of stability for raw lifts, right? So it generated a lot of stiffness by utilizing pressure appropriately during lifts. The other piece of that too is, and this is something I was taught as like a lifter back in the day, but like even something like when you're trying to develop pecs in different ranges, being able to expand the rib cage, your pec contracts around the rib cage. So if you can expand the volume of that part of your rib cage significantly, then you have a much bigger contractile range to move the pec through, right? And that's not nothing. Even things like bench pressing by pulling a lot of air into the upper part of the tank, you can create a lot of shoulder stability, a lot of scapular stability. AC joints tend to be less compressed, right? So there's mechanical advantages to having really strong functional rib cage. And I want to say functional, I just mean all of the parts can do their basic biomechanical jobs, right? They're not limited, but you end up finding, especially with lifters, upper T-spine is gets really stiff. And I know that because I was that guy before I got really into breathing. I was strong, but I couldn't move. Basically like C7 to T7 was like a cinder block. And I didn't know how much it was limiting me until I stopped letting it be like that. And I was like, wow, I'm strong in a lot more ranges. This is pretty cool, right? So it can help in those terms. It can help your shoulders be a lot stronger. It can help you pressurize more effectively when you lift, but then it can also help you with rhythm and tempo and timing of movement, right? So it helps you stay in tempo, right? And there's lots of reasons for that. If we're talking about sports performance, doing plyometrics, doing throws and slams, vocalizing and exhaling in timing with explosive maneuvers can matter. It can make a difference in appropriate neuromuscular coordination, but also just maintaining tempos, even if you just like hypertrophy work, right? I've known, I know for me, at least practically, I don't know that there's this preponderance of evidence, but anecdotally, in my experience for myself and with other people that I work with, breathing in rhythm with sort of eccentric and concentric and holding phases of the lift help people with the consistency of the repetitions in those lifts. And that's not nothing, right? That kind of consistency, that kind of intentional contractile effort matters. And we know for sure that, like the namesake of this podcast, mind muscle connection is a real thing, and that breathing in tempo with the movements that you're doing keeps you focused on what you're doing. And so if you're focused on what you're doing and you're doing it with rhythm, timing, and intention, then the benefit, especially in the aggregate, is significant. So that matters. So there's mind, there's movement, and then there's biochemical stuff, right? What I call matter, right? All the conditioning aspects that we can get into that stuff, but there's ways to improve aerobic performance, carbon dioxide tolerance. So it has massive effect for improving conditioning as well.
Yeah, no, that's super interesting. I definitely want to hit on that. So again, it sounds like with like your breath training, your breathing, like again, the big thing you said there, the mind being a big thing, right? Like it helps you work through certain situations. I'm assuming probably keeps you more, like you said there, just again, when we talk about like resiliency and stuff like that, it increases what you can deal with and you're able to work. Like you said, the cold plunge, I think is a great thing, right? Again, a lot of people like to poo-poo on it, but obviously the more I've learned about it, it's like there are some benefits outside of, like you said, the metabolic standpoint. We're not looking at those benefits. It's like there's just going in and doing that, being able to control your breathing under like a stressful situation can be super helpful for people to be able to handle more stuff essentially and not let it crumble, derail them and stuff like
Yeah.
that.
And there's lots of practical experience behind this. People have known this forever. It's not like Rob Wilson invented this stuff. People have been breathing to manage stress as long as there have been people who are breathing and stressed. So there's this is really a ton of history behind this. I think if we get into voodoo and myths, it starts to become an issue. But the reality is there's pretty strong neurological evidence for things like altering threat salience. So, like purposeful breathing, helping regulate amygdala activity and altering the way people who have panic disorder function. And so, do you have to wait until you have panic disorder to alter the behavior of your amygdala and change threat salience? You don't. You can use the same physiology to move farther towards the positive end of robustness. And that's all. I think that's all we're saying with breathing. It's not from, I didn't learn it at Hogwarts or anything. It's not magic, but
Yep.
it is very effective, and it's a tool that you carry with you all the time. So to not use it to me seems silly.
Oh yeah. Yeah, no, I agree 100%. Like you said, it's been around. Again, if again, a lot of people just they don't focus on it, and there's just so many benefits that you can get from just working on this thing that you do all the time. Nasal breathing. Anything there with I guess I feel like again that's all the rage. Like what are your kind of thoughts around nasal breathing and what do you typically kind of, yeah.
I'm glad you used the word rage because it seems to incite zealotry on both ends of the spectrum. Because some people say if you don't just breathe out of your nose, then you're not aerobic and your conditioning is worthless. And there's some people who are like, there are no meta analyses that confirm nasal breathing does anything. So, this is what I'll say first of all. If we just look at the structure of the human body as a normal part of health, you should mostly breathe through your nose just in daily life, unless you're talking, right? Or exerting high effort in a situation. But mostly you should be able to breathe through your nose. And if you can't, then you have a structural issue. And, like, for example, sleep apnea or like chronic snoring, those can cause problems farther down the line. And so if you can't breathe through a part of your face that was designed to deal with air, then that's a problem that you should, it's a health problem and you should get it corrected. However, if you're someone who's looking to enhance your fitness or you're an athlete who needs to alter your conditioning, do you have to nasal breathe to become more cardiovascularly fit or improve energy systems? You don't have to. That's nonsense. We know that's nonsense because even if you don't look at data, I'm sure anybody listening to this knows a fit person who doesn't just nose breathe when they work out. So it's a ridiculous supposition right from the go. You don't have to. But I think limited by the question, which is what additional benefit can we get if we do it? And so if you're a coach or you're somebody who's trying to be fit, what nasal breathing can do is offer an effective constraint in conditioning that can improve outcomes that you get and help use your time more efficiently and improve your awareness over what's happening physiologically without the use of technology. And so that kind of nuance is important. But like, just because you go run with your mouth open, or does that mean you're not going to get conditioned? No, that's ridiculous, right? No, if you do work and your heart and your lungs are forced to work at a higher rate to deal with an energy deficit, then they'll change. However, because your nose offers a lot more airway resistance than your mouth, then what will happen is to move the same amount of air, your diaphragm will have to work harder. And so diaphragm and intercostals will get conditioned. And those muscles getting more conditioned means you can move air more effectively, and they have to do less work to move the same amount of air. And those things don't work for free. The diaphragm is huge. It's a gigantic muscle. It's one of the biggest muscles in your entire body. It's bigger than the circumference of your rib cage because it has to contract in order to open it. So it's bigger around than you are. And so that means it uses a lot of energy to move. And your intercostals, right, the muscles between your ribs, they have to contract every breath. And so if they're not very efficient, then as you fatigue, more and more energy will get utilized just to make them work. And an anecdote is when I was working with Shift, we were doing some work with the UFC Performance Institute, and we saw one heavyweight athlete who, during a fitness test, was breathing something like 80 breaths a minute at a heart rate of about 155 beats per minute. So 80 beats or 80 breaths per minute is a dog dying in the desert heat, right? It's panting, basically. So if you can imagine 80 contractions a minute to move really very little air. And after about 6 weeks of nasal breathing, which forced him to breathe slower and more fully, repeat fitness test, same heart rate, 23 breaths per minute. And that is by definition an improvement in efficiency. So now his cardiovascular and his pulmonary system were more efficient. And how much influence did that have on his ability to do his sport? We determined there's a lot of factors. What we do know is that his conditioning efforts were a lot more successful after correcting those energy deficits, right? He's able to recover a lot better, even between bouts of power. So nasal breathing, while it doesn't yield a magic benefit, does help stabilize breath rhythm. It helps condition the diaphragm because it's contracting against more resistance. It'll help you become more tolerant to increasing levels of carbon dioxide. But there's some argument that just exercise in general will help with that. But I think the main benefits are increased awareness, right? More stable pressure in the rib cage and the lungs, and respiratory muscle conditioning. And we know that respiratory muscle conditioning, it matters, right? There is some good evidence for aerobic efficiency improving with respiratory muscle improvement.
No, like you said, I think the awareness is key. But then you also just mentioned too, it's like, do you have to always nasal breathe? No, but it sounds like the big takeaway is when we're not doing things super intense, we probably want to try and focus on that a bit more. And in turn, by doing that's going to bring that awareness piece that we've talked about throughout this entire time there. I feel like that, if anything, so far, main takeaway is just the awareness piece of everything.
Yeah.
Huge.
If you're listening to this and you just want to try it, you want to do some kind of like safe to fail experiment, then if you're doing some kind of basic cardiovascular warm up, like you ride a bike or you get on a stepper or whatever treadmill before you lift weights, just do it nasal breathing only for the next whatever 60 days. Or if you do cardiovascular work 2 or 3 days a week, if you're at lower intensities like what you would normally think of as zone 2, breathe slow, smooth, and even through your nose for the next 60 days and see what the benefit is for you, if any. And if you're really consistent, I think you might be surprised at what happens. But don't be trying to do intense stuff breathing through your nose, because you will hate me and it will suck and you will think it's bullshit and you'll stop.
Yeah, and your performance won't be as good.
Your performance will decline because you will hit your lactate threshold faster because you're not offloading carbon dioxide as quickly.
Do people just like naturally tend to just mouth breathe if they're not focused on it, or is it just dependent on the person, or is there any?
I think most do at high levels of exertion because you're trying to offload. It's a natural response to higher levels of acidity, right? You're trying to offload metabolic waste or metabolic byproduct. It's probably a better way to say it, but you're trying to offload the carbon dioxide that you're producing through work. And when we're doing work, there's a signal going from the carotid artery to the brain that's saying, hey, these carbon dioxide levels are going up, pH is changing. We need to alter this. And the conversation happens a lot faster than that, right? It's literally changing constantly every couple breath cycles. How deep, how fast, all of that is constantly being altered according to your level of fitness, your level of fatigue that day, your sleep, your attitude, your nutrition, how much caffeine have you had, right? So all of those components are influencing each other all the time, but it's natural to mouth breathe as you work harder and harder. Limiting that or taking away the ability to mouth breathe while you're doing specific types of conditioning, what it can do is encourage downstream conditioning. So if you're not allowed to offload this byproduct and it stays in the system at a more constant rate, then what has to happen is everything downstream from there has to get more effective at dealing with it, right? So your nervous system doesn't wait until there's too much to get rid of it. It's going to, the signals like in the carotid arteries in the neck, those signals are measuring blood flow on the way out. They're not measuring venous return. They're measuring how much CO2 is in the blood that's going out to the system. So it's predictive. It's saying, if we keep doing this, then it's more likely that this will happen. And that doesn't mean it is. We don't want physiology that waits until the moment before death to stop us. We want to be like, hey man, you're 10 steps from dying, not 1 step from dying. But what we do is we push that threshold to the right. So maybe we're like 5 or 6 steps from system shutdown so that we get a more potent stimulus. And so that we're taking advantage of some specific downstream chemistry where we can use it to do things like improve lactate thresholds without necessarily doing more work.
Yep.
So a lot of times when we're improving our fitness thresholds, we focus on outputs and not necessarily physiologies I'm not saying that's wrong. You need to know what outputs are, but you also want to know what is going on with the physiology. And often, unless you're doing like real time millimolar blood draws, you're actually measuring lactate, local lactate levels in real time. It's hard to know. And so nasal breathing at specific work rates can be a useful surrogate or a useful proxy for those metrics.
Yeah. Yeah. No, I think it's because I'll find myself naturally, like, even when I'm just going on a walk, right? I'll eventually want to do some mouth breathing. So it's like, hey, like, to me, that's a perfect time to really focus on that. And now, even when I do my conditioning work, like medium intensity type stuff, it's like I'm trying to nasal breathe as long as I can. But then obviously, when I do more interval style stuff, it's obviously going to breathe through my mouth there on that, like you mentioned there. But I know you hit on this in that conversation with Dr. Mike too, how, and you've been hitting at it here in the last little bit, what you're saying, but you could get more out of your aerobic training by doing nasal breathing at these kind of lower intensities. Like you, and I know you even said, I think in there that you had some athletes you worked with were like maybe leaving a little bit on the table by doing some mouth breathing while they were like doing this kind of lower level intensity type work.
Yeah. And I think, what happens is like begets like. And so if you're working hard and you're starting to, then that is self perpetuating. You just continue to stand there with your mouth open. And not only are there maybe some potential physiological advantages in terms of like energy system management, but tactically, if you're in a field sport, for example, or if you're in a combat sport, if you see the other person or the other team, your opponent, with their mouth hanging open, that's a signal to put pressure on. At least it is for me. I know I'm an avid jujitsu practitioner. If I'm doing jujitsu and I hear the person that I'm training with start to huff and puff out of their mouth, I'm going to start up upping the intensity or the rate of movement because I know I'm going to fatigue them out soon. So I'll weaponize that fatigue because I'm aware of it. Now, if you have tactically a person who, even if they're tired, is still breathing slow, smooth, calm, and controlled, one, there's a psychological benefit for them. But also, what is that telling an opponent? Whether it's you're playing pickleball and you don't look tired, people go, man, they're like, man, that guy never gets tired. He never looks tired. He never looks tired. And that's the thing that's circulating in their psyche is that you never look tired. And that's an advantage. And so even if we take all the other energy systems development stuff off the table, just as a tactical advantage alone, it's worthwhile. Even if it's just a psychological benefit for yourself or a flag that you're holding up to others that says you can't make me tired. That's not nothing, right? That it's still an advantage. So when we're talking about sports performance, there's that, but also if you're somebody who, if we take this back to stress management, he's just saying life doesn't have me, you don't got me. Nope.
Yeah.
I'm still calm, I'm focused, I know what I need to do. So if we just take all the other parts of it, even if all we get, if quote unquote all we get is the psychological and emotional advantage, it's completely worth it because that's often where people fail anyway, right? It's not like in fitness and in sport we don't know how to get conditioned. People know how to get conditioned. Everybody's fit. Where we have the biggest stopping point or the biggest stopgap is managing psychological stress load in high stress environments. With that said, can you nasal breathe while you exercise and get some benefit? Absolutely. And I wrote an article on this in more detail. I know I hit wave tops and jumped around a little bit, but I'll send you more done. Yeah. I'll send you some links to some articles that I wrote about these topics. And
yeah,
they're all short. None of the listeners will be like, oh my God, it's all short, digestible.
Yeah, no, that'd be awesome to get that show notes, the links in the show notes, man.
Got you.
Yeah, you know what I'm saying. Yeah, no, and again, we didn't really get to hit on this, but just again, for someone listening to this, if you can get better at nasal breathing at lower intensity work, it's again now that's going to have less strain on your system, so you can handle more and do more, recover, and have more capacity to do more things as well too, which I think is awesome as well too. So maybe to sum this up, what would you say? What would be your tips to get somebody to get started on this? What are maybe some practices that they can do, and then we'll end everything here with the breath talk.
Sure. So I'll give you like 3 categories that a person can start. You do all 3, you just pick one. One is if you want to use it to help you manage stress or rest more easily, you can do 5 minutes a day of a 3-second inhale, a 2-second pause, and a 5-second exhale. Before bed is often the easiest and it helps you transition to sleep. If you're anticipating a more stressful day, you could certainly do it in the morning or in the middle of the day during a lunch break or something to help reset your system. So that's one way. That's 3, 2, 5. 3-second inhale, 2-second pause, 5-second exhale. That's the resonance breathing that I mentioned. Okay, so that's one. The second one is when you're exercising, like if you're doing some kind of movement, whether it's lifting weights, calisthenics, plyometrics, try to coordinate inhales and exhales with the rhythms, tempos, and timing of the exercise you're doing. And just pay attention to how that affects your ability to coordinate. You don't have to make it fancy. You don't have to do ki like a 1980s karate tournament, but just purposefully exhale when you are giving effort. That's a good way to think of it, right? And then the last thing is experiment with nasal breathing. If you do some kind of low output, low impact cardiovascular work, whether it's walking, jogging, rucking, a lot of people ruck, right? Ride an exercise bike 2 to 3 days a week, breathe only through your nose when you do it. And that's slow, smooth, and even. So think about the quality of the breathing first, slow, smooth, and even. And then you can do things like play with tempos. So if you're rucking or walking or something like that, you could do inhale for 3 steps, exhale for 3 steps, inhale for 4 steps, exhale for 4 steps. If you're riding a bike, you could look at a specific RPM, right? So you could do step counts, you could do RPMs, play with it a little bit, but I would say give it the bare minimum would be 30 days, but 60 would be better. And just see how it feels, see how it works for you. What's your psychology like when you're doing it? If you wear a heart rate monitor, see how your heart responds to it.
Even like respiratory rate, if you track that, you could track that, see if that's trending down as well too. That could be another marker that someone looks at as well too. Resting heart rate, I'm assuming.
Heart rate variability, resting heart rate while you're doing work. Look at a bunch of, if you're a wearable person, look at them all. And because one might change that you don't anticipate, right? We don't have control over everything. You might go, oh shit, I didn't expect that my deep sleep went up because I was rucking nasal breathing, but it might happen. I'm not promising that, but be open to surprise.
Yeah. No, that's super helpful. I love it. Get those practical applications. And again, I think if anyone like when the things that they should take is I think the awareness piece is going to be key. People have that. And then they obviously have 3 practical applications that they can apply as well to it. Awesome, Rob. Really appreciate your time, man. This was super interesting. Again, I know you kind of mentioned this, but we only scratched the surface, I feel like, with everything here. But where can people find out more about you, and where do you want to lead them to, or do you want to lead them to any specific place or anything like that?
Yeah, so I'm easy to find on Instagram. I'm at the Check Engine Light. I have a book out right now called The Check Engine Light, Tuning Body and Mind for Performance Longevity. And that's an overview philosophy of health and performance. You can find that at thecheckenginelightbook.com. I have a Substack called Check Engine Light that I release a free written article and an audio article every week. So that's no charge. There's no money involved. I'm going to keep that free forever. So I have, I think, over 100 articles written on there so far. Those are easy ways to find me and interact with me if you want to.
Awesome. Cool. Yeah, I joined the Check Engine Light Substack and it's awesome. So definitely make sure you go and do that. Yep, Rob, really appreciate your time, man. Thanks again, and we'll talk to you soon.
My pleasure. Thanks for having me.